You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined in studio by Billy Galanko, and outside my window, a buzzing chainsaw as they cut down trees in my neighborhood. So I apologize if any of that comes through, but we have a lot of exciting stuff on the podcast today, Billy. 2 interviews, actually. One kind of a breaking news. You heard it here first on the Vint Podcast interview with Dan Petroski. Tell our listeners what went on with Dan over the past 2 weeks and a little bit about that conversation.
Yeah, it was funny. We have 2 interviews. Our second one's with Josh Entman, who actually referenced this Dan Petroski Massican news without us even prompting. So it worked out perfectly. But no, Dan is the owner and founder. You guys may remember from our previous episode on Massican Wines, which is kind of an Italian-inspired kind of wine, but also a lifestyle brand. And he and the whole brand was basically just acquired by Gallo Wines. And you guys may be familiar with Gallo Wines. They make a ton of wines. They're definitely the largest, I would say, family owned. I don't know if they're the largest wine company, but I think they are the largest family owned. If you go to a grocery store, almost, many of the wines that you see are going to be Gallo wines. So it's really interesting from the aspect of them being interested in Massican. It was, a smaller brand. I think he was between like 8,000 to 10,000 cases, and he's really focused on quality rather than volume, which tends to be Gallo's MO. So we had to get Dan on, number one, to congratulate him, because not only does he get, a kind of a payday and after all of his hard work, but he gets to stay on, and, he's staying on with the brand to help it grow. And they're basically going to give him still full reins, just the power of Gallo, money behind it. So it's really exciting for him. So we had him on to congratulate, tell us a little bit more about the deal, and just share in his excitement.
Yeah, it's a win-win for both Gallo and Massican, and Dan, win-win for both of them, because like you said, Dan gets to realize a lot of the hard work that he's already put into the brand and continue to take the reins, like you said. But then Gallo also adds a really dynamic piece to their portfolio. Like you said, a lot of their brands are sort of labels that we know from the grocery store, which is fine and is a needed portion of the market. And they do great business with it and great job with those brands. But Massican, I think, really rounds out sort of their ability to position a lifestyle and emerging style of wine itself in a way that can really hopefully take off and grow in the market.
Yeah. And what was interesting, and we give you a little behind the scenes in this interview, I was trying to ask him like how this came about. And he mentioned that, he had actually just been kind of became friends with Joe Gallo. And over the, a year or so, they kept in touch. And, basically one day kind of informally kind of just came up and they discussed, wanting to acquire them. So it's kind of cool to see the foresight of the family, even though they've been around for generations, looking to acquire stuff like this. And then we also got to touch on a little bit at the end, the 2020 vintage, how his white wines in Napa are going. Because everybody, always hears about how the red wines go in the vintage, but it's rare you kind of get some talk about the white wine vintage. So he's really excited for that quality. And it was a well-rounded but short 15-minute little interview.
Yeah, and then our second kind of longer interview that we are featuring today is with also, I guess, friend of the pod. We've had
definitely friend of
Christy Wenz, friend of Vint. We've had Christy Wenz of VINOHEAD fame on the podcast a while back, and now we have Josh Entman today, who is the founder and CEO of VINOHEAD, which is kind of an everything wine brand in that sort of they want to be let's call them like a lighthouse for the wine consumer, kind of leading the way in terms of wine culture, producers to explore, and just, I guess, trying to be the top level leader on wine information, wine education, and eventually introducing people to unique brands that, hopefully will be kind of commonplace in this generation of drinkers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really want to meet younger wine drinkers. And I'm not saying, 21-year-olds. It's everybody from, just starting to drink up until your, 30s, 40s, even 50s. People who are just discovering wine. They're trying to talk to consumers and meet consumers wine drinkers at where they're at. And I keep saying that and it sounds kind of weird, but the idea being like, how do you normally talk about things that you're into, whether it be sneakers or, handbags or anything else that you find interesting in pop culture? They're trying to talk about wine in that easily accessible, but also interesting way, rather than, talking to your friends about something and then you have to put on this stilted language or talk about wine in some really formal capacity. They're really kind of bringing it and making it really accessible. And then, like you said, describing and introducing folks to new producers, which I think is God's gift to the world, is just people introducing you to new producers.
Yeah. And Josh is unique and a compelling person to lead a brand like that because he understands the wine industry, and all of the things that the industry does really well and all the things that the industry maybe is lagging behind on. He understands those aspects, but he also sees the typical consumer very clearly and has a lot of really good perspective on where wine culture is headed, where consumer interest and trends are headed, and how, historically maybe the consumer industry has worked and wine industry has reached new drinkers and how it's sort of happening now. So he has a lot of great perspectives on that. And I think it will be interesting for users to, our listeners to have another outlet that they can go to get a sense for what's up and coming in the industry.
I just realized the saying I was trying to say is doing God's work, or whatever that saying is, like basically
God's gift to man.
Yeah, God's gift to mankind is interesting. But then, yeah, also the other thing I love about talking to Josh is, we kept going even after we ended the recording after an hour, is his passion for wine is, insatiable. Just hearing him talk about, these various small producers or his passion and, making people be able to, experience wine in a proper way and not, have to be put in this box. It's kind of infectious, which is what you get through like every, VINOHEAD mailing that you get. It's if you go to their website, it's very simple. You sign up and they'll be basically start sending you, email updates, recommendations, links to producers, just articles. You get a whole bunch of stuff and all the enthusiasm comes through in kind of every push. So that's also awesome.
Yep. So those are two great conversations that we'll bring to you later. I think, Billy, you want to do your what we're drinking this week? I know you had a lot of good wines this past weekend.
Yeah. It was a nice celebratory weekend. So we went out to dinner for my birthday. My birthday was Sunday, but we were out on Friday. And we had, as we talked about last week, the Medio Pepe. We had a really small produced Chenin as well. Both of those were great. But for the what we're drinking this week, I had a flight of dessert wines at the end. And one of them was a 1972 Tokai Azu 5 Petonios. So Tokai Azu as a whole is going to be the what we're drinking this weekend. It's one of my favorite wines. This is actually going to be the first repeat kind of that Vint has done. We've done Tokai dry ferment in the past. But for those who aren't familiar, basically what Tokai Azu is a botrytis, which for those who don't know what botrytis is, it's kind of this called the noble rot. It's kind of this fungus that can attach to grapes, specifically white wine grapes. I mean, it attaches to red wine grapes, but it's only good when it attaches to white wine grapes in certain situations. And it'll kind of insert this enzyme that kind of changes the chemical composition inside the grapes, and it also sucks out the water. So it really concentrates flavors and acid. And some of the most famous sweet wines in the world, like Sauterne and Tokai, are made from these. They've always been basically my favorite sweet wine. I've always had kind of a soft spot for it. I got to taste a bunch when I was in Budapest last time. But what they do differently than Sauterne is they don't just press the botrytis grapes into, kind of a wine and ferment it. They basically end up making like a paste. They kind of just smush the grapes, the seeds, kind of everything. And they make this paste, and then they combine that botrytis paste with fermented and basically dry ferment. Ferment is the Furmint is the primary grape. There's a handful of other Austrian white grapes also included, which I also recommend checking out the dry versions of. But basically you have this dry white wine, high acid, pretty crisp and lean. And then they dump in the botrytis wine or the botrytis paste to kind of, number one, add sweetness, but it also adds tons of depth and complexity. And you may see the bottles labeled Petonios. It looks like Petonios is how they say it in Magyar or Hungarian. And basically it was meant back in the day buckets. So basically it used to be how many buckets per certain amount of wine was thrown in of this botrytis stuff, the botrytis paste. So it's a really unique way of creating a wine with all the depth and complexity of, say, a Sauterne that has a lot of botrytis, but also this intense freshness and brightness because they're mixing it with these dry wines. So something just special and near and dear to my heart. And I had the oldest one I've ever had this weekend.
And for people going out and looking for Tokai at your wine shop, well, you could ask which is what you should do, go into your local wine store and ask the wine shop owner. But if you're just going into a Total Wine, or what's your place called out west there?
We have a bunch of things, but K&L, or are you talking about
the big one?
The big one? I don't even know.
K&L, not big. Yeah. Okay. If you're going into a big wine store, Tokai, it's spelled Tokaj, right, Billy?
Yeah.
So it looks like Tokaj. So you can spot it on the shelf.
Yeah. And
I was tripped up many times. I did not know that what I was seeing and what I was hearing people say was the same thing for many years.
Yeah. And it is a region. So there is dry Tokai. So the Azu, the ASZU, is the sweet side of things. And if you see anything spelled like Tokay, there were wines around the world who called themselves Tokai and spelled it like that. And those aren't it. It has the J. But that shows you, it used to be back in, I think it was one of Napoleon's favorite wines, but it used to be considered one of the top wines in the whole world. So that's why they ended up calling wines around the world Tokai. And I think it's just starting now to get more of its shine after the fall of the Soviet Union and the reemergence of Hungarian wines onto the market. So pretty excited, and everybody should check it out. They're perfect for the holiday season as well, which is coming up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoys our two featured interviews today. First with Dan Petroski and then with Josh Entman. Reach out to us and reach out to Dan and congratulate him.
Dan, thank you so much for joining for us on short notice here. First off, congrats. Are you excited by the week's events, or more so for the harvest?
Thank you. It's good to be back. It's good to see you, Billy. I'm excited for a lot of things, especially making wine this year with under new ownership and management and partnership. I've, as you may intro, I've had a great week this past week with selling Massican to Gallo family and the team at Gallo. They've retained me to be the creative director of the brand as well as the winemaker for a minimum of 5 years, so we can kind of grow and develop the vision I've originally had for Massican. And that's just thrilling. That's just really, really thrilling. So I couldn't be happier. And it's just given me another lease on life with regards to heading into this 2023 harvest.
Yeah, it's so exciting because I think one of the most interesting things that we talked about with you is you were building all these different pieces of Massican, like the magazine and all these things, just because you were interested. You weren't just trying to build something to be acquired. And then now that you have been acquired, you're able to kind of blow those out. What are you most excited about, with a little bit extra capital now to be able to do?
I'm most excited about the priority of Massican, which is to make more wine. With more wine, we will have more opportunity to do fun and cool shit. So that's where I'm most energetic because, wine has been the vehicle to allow me and Massican brand to be creative and to reach out to new audiences through different channels of content. And also it's because it's content that I really liked and wanted to create and wanted to be surrounded with and wanted to work with creative people. So right now I have a team of professionals that are ethically creative and super stoked to be part of, for me to be part of their portfolio and also I to be working with them. So I think we're going to continue doing what we're doing, continue focusing on great wine, making a little bit more of it at the beginning. And then we're going to start thinking about how the creativity can continue to kind of surround all things Massican.
Awesome. So are you, I guess in the first part of being able to make more wine, is there like an immediate network of additional fruit that's available to you that's quality in the Gallo family, or how are you going to go about expanding that and keeping your variety interest?
For sure. Being a white wine only winery, it's not limiting at all. It doesn't limit me at all. It still gives me a lot of opportunity for growth. So we still want to maintain aromatic whites as our kind of core product base. So we've built a pyramid structure of, what's on top of that pyramid: small production, high priced wines. And when that's, for example, Hyde Vineyard Chardonnay, which is about a $60 SRP, but limited production. And then we have, the core product that Massican created, which is these white wine blends with Italian grape varieties. That's going to be our kind of, our, for lack of a better term, our bread and butter, our kind of focused wines about the brand, that bring the brand that kind of Mediterranean energy. And then we're going to lead into growth of Sauvignon Blanc and growth and starting a new wine, a Pinot Grigio this year, which I'm really, really excited about. Harvesting some of that tomorrow and then again next week. So I'm really kind of pumped about that. And we didn't, during this process, it was a very short courtship and we never really talked about vineyard sources and wineries and winemaking facilities. And I wasn't I didn't travel me around the state of California and show me all of their cool shit. We talked about what the vision was for Massican to continue to do what I'm doing with a support system, with capital, with a focus on me spending time on creativity and winemaking while they can help with some of the logistics, the back end supply chain and the network of sales and marketing.
Nice. I think some people may think that, you have your Italian roots, you want to go in your Italian theme. And some people think maybe Sauvignon Blanc's a little different. But, really in reality, like Friuli makes, amazing Sauvignon Blanc and there are plenty made around. And same with Pinot Grigio, obviously in the further north. Are you going to try to keep like a certain style with these wines that'll be kind of consistent with your other wines as well?
100%. I'm excited about Pinot Grigio being a varietally labeled wine, but I'm going to push it to the max of how much I can blend in while retaining the Pinot Grigio moniker, because I still want to be able to focus the energy on this kind of Bianco style, which is, this Mediterranean style of citrus and almond and seawater and kind of really energetic white wines. And I want to be able to use those colors and those paints in with Pinot Grigio so I can actually continue to grow and develop that Mediterranean style, as opposed to leaning directly into, focusing on, okay, this is the Pinot Grigio that works. No, this is the Massican's interpretation of Pinot Grigio. So that is a huge focus for me. Sauvignon Blanc, I really love what Massican has been able to do with their vineyard sources in the last 12, 13 years. We've had such a great exposure to, kind of cool climate and warm climate. And we've kind of straddled this place that with Sauvignon Blanc, that's not California, not French and Sancerre like, not necessarily New Zealand like. We found this like real ether of a style and that kind of fits into the Massican arc. And I'm going to do my damnedest to continue to do that. And I've been told, just make the best wines. You don't need to make a lot of it. Just make the best wines you can make under Massican and we'll take it from there.
Cool. And then when you're thinking about blending varieties in with your Pinot Grigio, are you going to try to use some of those kind of the Italian, lesser known Italian varieties that you might mix in or that you might include in some of your other wines as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I've already had some ideas of what's going to work with the Pinot Grigio. I've historically made a Pinot Grigio Greco blend in the past, and now that's a Salentina and Greco blend. So I still have those tools in my toolkit. It's 11 white grape varieties that we're going to be harvesting this year. And so it's just really fun. The blending trials are the best part of the job. Harvest is over. The weather has changed. It's late October, early November. And you get down and sit and taste all these young, fresh, vibrant wines. It's my favorite time of the year.
Nice. Are you going to be continuing to do winemaking for other people as well? Or now that you're with Gallo, are you going to be able to focus full time on Massican?
Full time on Massican. It's my goal. It's what I, decided to do in summer 2021 was to just focus on this, don't do any consulting. This is my last job. This is my legacy. This is the brand I built in 2009. I've been a solopreneur forever. Now I have a team of professionals behind me to help kind of bring the vision to life. I don't want another job. I've told, Joe Gallo, this is my last job. I don't want another one. I'm committed day and night to this project. And there's no real better solution for me in the wine industry right now than to focus all my energy on Massican.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you had made the move, but I didn't know if you were still consulting on the side. So that's really exciting. And then I guess on the other side of things, I have to ask, do you think people are going to have be like, are you not necessarily selling out, but they're going to be like Gallo? Or are they going to impact your, they acquired Rombauer in the same week? Are you still how are you going to maintain your brand and keep Massican?
If, as you've gotten to know me through this process of us connecting online and email and all the other things, the crazy shit I've been doing, I'm just myself. I don't think I've been quiet about the idea of building Massican into a real business that has value to someone else. I think I stated in the press a couple of years ago, but no, it's not a sellout. I mean, I've never met a more authentic and honest and joyful group of people than I have with the Gallo team. And I am really excited I mean, on top of that, they are the preeminent professionals in the industry, and they're still family run business. So I mean, and as my wife said, when I told her about it, you're lucky they're Italian. So she didn't want me selling in some other company. She really loved the idea that there's an Italian family run business.
Cool. Are you going to instantly, this is kind of going back to my like wine industry nerdiness. Are you going to get like instant kind of more distribution now? Because I was just at a little wine shop here. It's like a, kind of crafty. They pride themselves on their unique selection, and they had Massican, and I was able to, they're actually pouring it by the glass, and that was awesome. But it's kind of a boutique place. Are my parents in, say, Virginia going to be able to find the wine more easily now?
I hope so. The goal is, with this price point of wine, the core of our product is going to be between $25 and $30 to $35 a bottle. That's still a very expensive wine to a lot of people. But the hope is that we can make that wine more accessible. And when people find it and they can afford it, they can buy it. If they can afford it and they can't find it, that's a problem. If they can find it, that's my whole goal, is that putting Massican on more tables. The pandemic helped me understand that, sitting down and breaking bread with family and friends and eating and drinking and talking about the world around us and spawning great ideas is just the kind of the epicenter of the lives that I want to live. And I hope a lot of other people want to live. And wine's a big part of that.
Awesome. So circling back, I am kind of curious though. You said it was a fast courtship. I know Josh, who we'll talk to in our interview coming up here, was like, I want to meet the person who had the great idea in Gallo and was able to convince the team to acquire Massican. But that seems different than the rest of their portfolio. Yeah, what they say? How did that?
It was a family member. It was Joe Gallo, third generation Gallo, and he runs the luxury division, the fine wine division for Gallo, and he's working with everyone from Louis Martini and Paul Meyer and Dave Finney at Oren Swift, and obviously now Ron Bauer. And he's taking this big chance of this little brand because we got to know each other over a glass of wine last summer. And he literally was like, I'm rooting for you, man. This is really, everything you're doing is really cool. And kind of, we left that kind of first meeting as like fast friends, and we kept in touch and had dinner earlier this year. And he was just like, how can I help? And I was like, it's a list. And then he kind of thought through the process, convinced the family and the team at Gallo that this was a bet that he's willing to take. Set really, but there are huge goals and aspirations that we have to achieve in order for this to make sense to everybody. And I think that those are actually, they're the floor, not the ceiling. And I'm really excited about when he told me the numbers. I was like, fuck, I can do that in 3 to 5 years. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. It came straight from the family. That's an important part of it, right? It's not a bunch of R&D MBAs sitting around trying to figure out how to create the next great white wine brand. It was, them, Joe Gallo just saying, this is it. Let's do this.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I was curious myself. So that's really interesting. Cool. I've only wanted to grab you for 10 or 15 minutes here. So before we go, I would have to ask, how's the vintage looking? How's the harvest looking for 2023?
Oh, it's fantastic. I am over the moon from where we are right now. We had a really nice cold, wet winter, cold spring as well. We had a big, nice kind of warm July, as we all did. August was perfect weather for ripening. September is showing perfect ripening weather. Early read on the vintage is above average yield, which is something we need. It's been pretty low in the last couple of years, 21, 22. The drought really, really took toll on the vines, and the heat waves really took toll on the vines. Early flavors are vibrant. They're bright. There's nuance and depth. Maturity of the grapes are happening earlier with lower sugars. So that's actually a really positive, especially for a white winemaker who likes to lean on the 12% alcohol wines. So I'm excited. I'm only 15% or so into the vintage at this time, but starting tomorrow, I will basically pick 5 out of the next 7 days, and then after pick a day, a weekend off and probably pick every day for, 2 or 3 straight weeks and be done by early first, second, third of October, the latest.
Awesome. That's great to hear. What are the latest ripening varieties, just out of personal curiosity, that you work with?
It's funny because I try, because I'm working with white varieties in a really warm, dry conditions. I tend to like them, getting them in the kind of the cooler parts of the region. And some would say Carneros is a cool part of Napa Sonoma, but it's actually, a warm part, another place in the world. So I work with some varieties like, for example, Greco, which is famous in southern Italy in the Campania region, up in the hills of the mountains there. And it's usually a slow ripening variety, and it needs that kind of heat and it needs that southern Italian heat and dry. I have some in Russian River, and that's, if I'm lucky, I'll be picking that in, early October, keeping my fingers crossed. But like Greco is a late ripener in some locations. I'll be picking a younger, fresher Greco in another location a few weeks before that. But Tokai Filano, Rebola Jala, Greco, these are all great varieties that can hang on the vine a little bit and kind of push me into mid-September on a normal year. So now I'll be into late September, early October.
Cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you for your time. We're right at 15 minutes. So congratulations again. And thanks so much for hopping on to talk about it.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Billy.
That was our interview with Dan Petroski. And now here is Josh Entman of VINOHEAD.
Josh, thank you so much for joining today. Great to see you again.
Good to see you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think it's been almost 2 years since we had lunch together when Nick was out here visiting last time. So it's been too long.
Yes. Do you go to that restaurant still? That's all I ever really care about is, can I convince someone or convert someone to go to my favorite local joints, even when I'm not there?
I liked it a lot, but I've not been back. I actually forgot what it was, to be honest. So
I have, even like with friends or colleagues, you know how it is in LA, everything's so spread out. So you're just always going to the West Side, and then you got to go down to the South Bay and you do all these things. But people go to a lot of the same places. I don't know if that's like a trendy thing or it's just like they got a table that they like. I feel like I have that, but I also feel like mine are more foodie driven, where I'm really trying to, yes, we need a quiet area to have a conversation or have a business lunch, but you don't need to go to Beverly Hills to do that for every single meal.
True. Yeah.
Billy, don't you drag yourself into the same natural wine bar every Wednesday?
Well, I was going to say his area is just slightly, it's like a black hole, not a black hole, but it's out of our loop. Like we're on the east side. So it's like getting over to the middle of town takes forever if you're, the wrong time of day in LA. So, but speaking of that, you're based in LA. Can you tell us a little bit about like how you got into wine? And then obviously we'll mix in like VINOHEAD and how the culture comes about. Because I think LA and wine and culture go hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm an old media fogey. Never used to say that, but apparently I'm the elder statesman now. I started my career in digital media, which I don't even know if we have to distinguish anymore because media is media, but it was digital media back then. Came out right after college, started in advertising, worked my way, I was at a bunch of startups. And so I was always drawn to startup culture. Never worked for like a Viacom or anything, like no Disney. So I was drawn in early and was an early stage employee at a bunch of them, and then eventually had a startup of my own with a colleague who also grew up in Chicago. Good friend of mine from Chicago. We were drinking buddies. Wine was present always. Our budget was different then. I think it was like $11 Malbec at Bevmo, right? This is, by the way, that's a dated reference just in general, because there were no real sort of independent wine shops that we knew of at the time, nor were we seeking them out in our early 20s. It was sort of the Total Wines of the world, the Bevmos. I grew up in Chicago, Binny's as sort of a larger retailer. So we would drink a lot of wine. We would talk about a lot of things, but our startup was in the viral video business, which at the time when YouTube was in its infancy was sort of a very cool, opportunistic sort of movement. This is before vloggers. This is before really anything. This is when people were just posting all their archived videos on the internet. And there was a lot of pranks and pratfalls and weird stuff like that. So we were able to build a pretty sizable YouTube network, mostly comedy driven, until iPhones and stuff came out. until people really started capturing life moments and not just a guy trying to fix his roof and falling, which again, still makes me laugh. I love a slip on a banana peel. Grew up with the Three Stooges. My dad would be proud that I said that. And so we were, building a network of user-generated content that became one of the largest networks on YouTube. So I would say that during that evolution, that was like a decade of my life in the early aughts. And I became obsessed with wine on a trip to Napa, which happens to a lot of people. Actually planned a trip there with my folks to meet for, I think it was Thanksgiving or Christmas. And I got the bug, couldn't stop. Early days, I wanted to open a wine bar. I wanted to open one of those wine bars where you would put like the credit card in, like a Dave and Buster's type,
Oh, yeah.
Which they still have, like they have a great one up in Sebastopol called Region is the name of the wine bar in downtown Sebastopol in the Barlow. And you get money on a card and you go up to the machine. They have much better wine, by the way, than the ones that used to be here. But there was one in Culver City a long, long time ago. And I was like poking around. I'm like, I want to write a business plan. I think this is a thing. Dave and Buster's for wine or whatever it was. It was a terrible idea, but always loved food, always loved wine. My business partner also, we would just obsess over like opening a restaurant. And you want to do it in your 20s for all the wrong reasons. You're like, I need a place where my friends and I can just drink for free and hang out and it's cool. But ultimately didn't do that. And it wasn't until much, much later, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, that I really started kicking the tires on the wine business.
So when you first went to Napa, back up, was that, what year was that? And what was it about going to Napa that, made you catch the bug? Was it standing in the vineyards, drinking the wine? Was it stories that you heard? What kind of was it? Also, I slipped on a banana peel at the grocery store last night. I didn't think that was something that you could actually do.
It's on security footage somewhere, Brady, just so you know.
I felt my legs go out from under me. And I thought, what happened to me? And I looked back and it's a banana peel. So
the bad things happen in grocery stores all the time. Also, people, if you remember back to the original pranksters or even like Vine videos, a lot of people were just doing 6-second videos of throwing cartons of milk and checking themselves at the checkout counter. I think that was an early Logan Paul video. So those things actually, it's a good setting for a jackass-inspired moment. Napa. So it's got to be almost 15 years now, and ended up going back year after year for family holidays. And my parents are in Chicago. My older brother, who's my only brother, lived out in LA, engineer. We're total opposites in terms of career, creative brain, whatever. I'm a lefty, so maybe I got something wrong with me. Or I'm ambidextrous, which makes me even weirder. And so we had just decided that was a place to go. We were like, let's meet in Napa for Thanksgiving or for that. I think it's everything. I mean, Napa for us, for wine geeks, is branded to be our Disneyland, right? I mean, I think you could argue that Napa is one of the greatest branding experiments outside of just a typical consumer product, right? Outside of the Apples and Nikes of the world, Disney, anyone that's in your sort of life cycle from an early age. Now, Napa gets you later when you're 21 plus, but they do a pretty good job of maturing with you. I think the fear is that they might have matured too much now or gone maybe so far off the rails in terms of price point, in terms of accessibility, that it's not as appealing as it once was. That's probably a separate conversation. But I was drawn in by everything from the beauty to a lot of curiosity about like, how is this distributed everywhere? There's not a lot of land here. Where's all this wine coming from? Like when you're there, the valley just gets tighter and tighter as you start driving towards Calistoga. You're like, this is not grape land. Like, where are all the grapes coming from? What is the process? I think my fascination was the brand, the idea of the families, the institutions, the Madavis, et cetera, and why it was so attractive as a sort of sense of place for all of us, and that's the romantic side that they want to convey always. And I think there's a lot of romanticism in that. But I actually ended up spending a lot more time after some of those Napa trips in Paso Robles, in Santa Barbara, Central Coast, stuff that was more accessible to LA. And I think that's probably where I fell in love with the wine business, because I felt like I was meeting sort of the artisan craftsmen, the people making it. And that was true of some trips in Napa. But your first trip to Napa, your first several trips, you go to the large scale, you go to just the stuff on Highway 12, right? And you just sort of bop around and you make an appointment if you needed to. Back in the day, you didn't need to. and you went into the ones that you saw at the grocery store, truly. So I think over time, you start to appreciate family-owned, independent, even if some of them were. And I remember, my family, they've been members of Joseph Phelps for 30-some years. And they'll still tell stories of what it was like in the 80s or 90s. My mother still tells story about going on an ATV or on a golf cart with John Bueller, I think, Bueller Vineyards, and then you get to go to the grocery store and you'd see Bueller cab and she'd always be like, I was there. It's the storytelling. It always works. And you don't know if it's big, small. You just know, they have it in Trader Joe's now. I feel like I discovered it first. It's kind of like discovering an indie band before they break. The romanticism.
You found more of the romanticism though when you went to Santa Barbara and Paso Robles. Was that around the same time?
Paso Robles was next. And I think what I love, and I still do, I think that's an amazing wine community. I think maybe the best out here, because it doesn't matter if you like that style of wine, if you're into Rhone varietals, if you like them bigger, it's fairly warm there. They make a certain style of wine. I think it does catch you somewhere on your sort of wine path, on your journey where you're into that. And then you discover the wines of the Rhone and you discover, I like red blends. I don't need to drink cab all the time. I don't know if this happened to you guys. It is a little evolutionary. It's like, how do you find your way to Burgundy, or just lighter fare? But at that time, maybe a nice dinner for you is a steakhouse dinner. And you're starting to see these smaller producers from the Central Coast pop up on menus and compete almost for shelf space, the same way they would at the grocery store. They're competing for, the wine list space to be on there. And one of the first places I went was L'Aventure. And L'Aventure had the feel and had the story of this guy who just said, fuck it, I don't like the way that they do things in France. And I want to blend Bordeaux and Rhone varietals and it was just classic and beautiful and big, amazing tasting experience and amazing people that recommended everything in that city. I actually still owe a debt of gratitude to one of the girls that worked in the tasting room there, who just wrote me a list of everywhere I needed to go, all the places. And it felt like they were her friends. It felt like she had dinner with them the night before. I've had trouble even recently, many years ago in Napa, when you say that and they're like, we don't taste much. We just work. And you're like, oh no, come on. What do you like to drink? Where do you go? It feels a little bit like a hotel concierge where, are you getting a VIG for this? If you tell me to go there, is there a kickback? Do you actually like those wines? Do you drink those? How do you feel about your neighbors? I've been in Paso during the holidays and they're dropping off gift baskets full of wine at their fellow neighbors. And I just think that's special.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, nowadays with the consolidation in the wine industry, you're only recommended things that are owned by that same company too. You're like, what if we get out of that? No, that makes a lot of sense. We were actually just up in Sonoma. We stayed in Sebastopol this weekend. But also we tend to lean Sonoma for that same reason of it's a little less corporate. It feels kind of more like the people who are actually making the grapes or making the wine. And some of these wineries are still there. So how did telling these stories and learning about these folks kind of lead into, I guess we can talk about what VINOHEAD is, but lean into wanting to kind of bring people more into the non-corporate side of wine? Or how did that combine with you to mixing with, maybe small sneaker drops? Or I don't know, how did you bridge the gap between wine, small producers and stories, and the culture element that you wanted to kind of bring to life?
I just didn't see a representation of my peer set growing up with the sort of the institutions and we could call it corporate, commercialized wine, big box, whatever. But like any product, and this is not exclusive to wine. We talk about this a lot. This happens with your food. It happens with your beauty products. It happens with anything. Once you start to gain a better understanding of what goes into it or the people who make it, the place from where it came, you're willing to spend up on this stuff. And I don't think that there's a number, there's a report every year that's going to tell you whether consumers spend more, drink less, volume of cases being shipped. I mean, it's purely circumstantial. It's always a pain in the ass when you read these things because you're like, is that telling us that there's huge upside and potential and opportunity? Or are you telling us that you're a doomsdayer and we should be scared? I mean, Silicon Valley Bank's annual wine report to me is a joke. And I actually, and maybe it's up for debate, and it's a different business now, Silicon Valley Bank. So I don't know what they plan to do with that annual report. But a lot of what they say and a lot of what they've preached, and this is going back like 5 years of that report, is we need to get millennials to drink wine or like some just ridiculous, verbose crap. And I'm like, they drink it. Maybe we don't market it well. Maybe we don't think about it. Maybe everything that we do industry-wide, and then I'll get into why I think there's a great opportunity. Industry-wide is pandering, or you're surveying the wrong people. So you're not getting a real snapshot of like how young people are coming into wine. It's different than when I did it, 15 years ago. Things change. It reminds me of when the movie studio heads make decisions on what the consumers want to watch and see. And you're like, oh yeah, that guy should be making the decision. And I don't think you're really connected to the culture. So I feel privileged, and maybe you feel this way too. You guys are obviously in wine, but we live in places where we get to see young or youthful culture engaging in wine the same way they engage in fashion, sports, health and fitness. Like, it's just a vertical. It is an enthusiast vertical, but there are factions in wine that are pretty vast, right? I think I just saw that the price for a bottle in Napa now has eclipsed $100. It's like $108. What are you talking about? But that's a certain buyer. That's a certain buyer that wants Colt Cabernet or whatever, right? Or just wants to buy it at the grocery store. There is plenty of wine coming from other regions in California, in Washington State, in Oregon. Obviously out on the East Coast, we have wine being made in Michigan, Virginia, the Finger Lakes. Like, it's more interesting and somewhat more accessible now for our appreciation. I think a lot of that is also driven by our ability to travel. And I sort of credit Airbnb with exposing us to places maybe we otherwise wouldn't have gone. I think it's generational too, that we desire to do that. That's where we spend a lot of our money, is on food, wine, culture, experiences. So when you go to Portugal and you drink the local product, you kind of come back and you're like, I want to drink some Portuguese wine. You go to Greece this summer and you're like obsessing over Greek white wines. And you come back and you're like, where do I get these wines? Well, you don't get them at Bevmo. You really don't. And you don't get them at Total Wine. So it changes your perception of seeking out these products that have, well, yes, more of an interesting story, but also come with a sense of place. And the purveyors that kind of carry those are usually local stores, independent wine shops. So now you're opening up a new channel for the consumer. What I think about that is that the sort of culture side in this is always misrepresented. And anyone that says otherwise about like young consumers drinking this, no, they just drink White Claw or Truly or anything. Yeah. And they smoke weed and they spend all their times on their phones and they buy things on the internet and we are multitaskers by nature. We're multifaceted. We're multicultural. Like I'm sort of irritated by the fact that anyone would say, we have to win back this young consumer. We have been stunted in our ability to buy homes, to do a lot of things in life. We're drinking wine and our wallet share will grow with us, but our mind share is there. I believe that firmly. And I think the opportunity that we saw at VINOHEAD was, why isn't anyone sort of broadcasting or capturing the culture side? The economics will match. I'm not actually worried about like the economics. Like we'll get our way up to spending $50, $60, $70 a bottle, whatever, collecting wine, using it as an asset class. But if we don't talk to the people and sort of represent them and be a mirror image, then we've already lost.
Yeah. I mean, Napa is, I think with probably every generation, if you ask them, where do you buy wine in the US, they would say Napa. But like you said, Napa doesn't speak to every generation in terms of the way they market. So the focal point of wine in the US isn't for most people, or at least I feel like that's how some people perceive it, like you're saying. And I know that there's a desire from millennials, because I think people have said in the past that, millennials don't spend money they don't buy like expensive things. I've heard people argue both sides of that. But all of my friends who, the alcohol they consume that they pay the most attention to and pay money for and pay attention to quality is beer. So I think that the craft beer industry has done a great job of speaking like to that cultural moment. And like you said, wine sort of lagging behind.
They brought up in one of the Silicon Valley Bank reports, which, and again, this guy, Rob McMillan, I'm not trying to dog him. I appreciate the amount of research that goes into this. Shout out to Rob if he's listening. He helped.
Yeah, he's a fan of it. No.
He is. And he helped me frame my first investor deck. So I guess it worked because I just used all of his quotes against him as opportunity. We need to do this. We need to do that. There's no platform. There's no that. And I was like, yes, I agree. Thank you. But one thing that they said, I want to say it was last year, was like, the industry needs to come up with a global campaign to encourage participation in the category, like a Got Milk. They actually referenced the Got Milk campaigns that we grew up with. And again, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, at least they offered something rather than just sort of saying, into ether, like, we need to do something. And then they're like, but it's hypothetical or whatever. They came up with like, maybe that's a solution. Even if we think that that's a good idea, who's in charge of making that? Who's in charge of creating the campaign? Right now, this is where I get really scared. Is it like the Wine Institute of America? Who's making the campaign? What does the creative look like? What platforms do they distribute? Are they going to buy TV spots during an NFL game? What are you going to do? So I actually think about this. I mean, this is when I put my media hat on probably, and I'm a pain in the ass because I'm like, not a bad idea perhaps, but it's down to execute. What are we even talking about? If you created this campaign, drink wine, save water, drink wine, there it is. Hashtag it, let's go. And then who are you going to show? What producers? What land? How do we represent what we think is truly happening in wine when this goes back to my studio argument? Who are the chiefs that are going to be making the call about encouraging 25 to 35-year-olds to drink wine over their sort of ready to drink beverages, which I think we all agree is a trend. The packaging is fine. We all talk about making things easier, right? Whether it's twist caps or putting it in cans or more sustainable packaging. I think we do care about the ecological impact that we're making. I know I think even some of the bigger companies are actually trying to reduce their carbon footprint with glass, reduce the ridiculously heavy bottles that are unnecessary. So we're doing more stuff, and that's sort of appealing. But it always feels like it's gimmicky in that they see money and capitalism kicks in. And that to me actually pushes the culture further away from it. If they see White Claw making a fortune, then someone at Constellation or Gallows, let's just start putting stuff in cans so they could take it to the beach. And you're like, but is that why you're putting it in a can? Are you marketing it as safer for the environment, better for the environment? This is the clean wine argument, the natural wine argument that we have daily. You guys know most of the wine you drink is natural, but there are plenty of producers around the world that don't want to be on that shelf by choice. They do not want to be pinned down or alienated into a natty wine category. The greatest wines I've ever had are all natural or made with intention, right? And made properly and also made for distribution. And there are requirements sometimes in order to protect that wine to make sure that it can travel across the sea, land on a store shelf. So I feel like there's a lot of discussion out there, but no one was sort of harnessing it in a platform way. And to bring it back so that I don't just rant and rave, and I apologize, is like, what does it look like if you created Wine Enthusiast or Wine Spectator in 2020? That was thesis number one, right? We launched at the very end of 2020. We're a pandemic baby. We immediately went through an accelerator program, which was really helpful because I was a solo founder. I had this idea. I started mapping out and I spent 2 years looking at the wine industry from every corner. And I was like, no, I think there's a platform play. How do you become sort of the definitive authority or voice from a media standpoint for a new generation of consumers who don't spend like my parents and don't drink like my parents? Thesis one. Thesis two, and sort of more mission driven, is how do we bring these parties closer together? The wine industry is very segmented between B2B and B2C. And I actually think most of the discussion and most of the things are very industry. It's really not a consumer play that often anymore. But the consumer is the one having all the fun. We're the ones buying it, drinking it, hanging out, doing dinner parties. But all the magazines, the sort of like quarterly zines, all that stuff just feels like it's like restaurant industry news. It's like we all hug because we're all in it. It's like, we got to break free. This is an echo chamber. I actually only care if a random customer buys a wine because of a recommendation we made. that to me is true influence. And considering that there's 15 critics now with scores on shelf talkers in every shop, I love that the sort of modern wine shop doesn't have that it's absolutely not going to influence the decision. The shopkeep might, the employees, maybe some new media publication who comes in and talks about it with intellect and doesn't just have to say the best red wine under $30 coming from, whatever. I think we've all grown tired of that. And so our mission was, I think we can bring producers and consumers closer together. This is a consumer play, but you have to ingratiate yourself with the industry and solve their problems. So I think then they listen. I think if you solve their problems, they listen. Until then, they kind of just say, good luck. Yeah, just what we need, another publication or whatever.
Yeah, I think Oh, go ahead, Brady.
Yeah. So one product play that I think has tried to break into the younger demographic has been this no or low sugar wines, packaged up with that kind of labeling. There's the canned wine. Obviously, there's campaigns about, we've had this for a long time, but the sulfites and the things that people say, oh, this makes me feel bad. So, X wine that we packaged up, this Pinot Grigio won't make you feel bad, or no alcohol. Are any of those categories, you think, barriers to moving the ball forward, or do you think that they're helpful in some way?
Before you answer, Josh, I just want to say those low to no sugar wines drive me nuts. I hate those ads.
Yeah,
No,
really. I don't know if they're popular, though, if they just have a lot of marketing spend. I'm not sure.
I think, having Aveline and Cameron Diaz and them sort of, let's assume that sparks a broader conversation about clean wine. Because
hold on. The one where the girl pours white sugar into a glass and there's none of this. It's just absolutely, it's almost illegal that they can even do that.
Well, and
Mondavi should sue them, or Constellation should sue them for doing that.
It's a very nebulous world. And I actually think that's part of the challenge is, how do we have such a very highly regulated industry? And Nick, obviously, founder of Vint, can sort of wax poetic about the hurdles he's had to overcome from the investment side, fine wine investment, to the marketplace side, like the Tied House laws, the distribution. I mean, there are roadblocks everywhere, which again, I feel like we're participating in breaking through, because that is a consumer problem as much as it's a producer problem. The fact that we have this highly regulated market, and yet we still don't have to tell people the ingredients that are in the wine, is that's sort of a backhanded slap. That's a punch to the face, actually, which is, we want to make sure that we can tax you, and we can do this, and we can control alcohol distribution based on a 3-tier system that's now almost 100 years old. That's a prohibition era law. But the ingredients, nah, that's for food. What's in it, how it's made, the fact that someone might use that negatively against you to claim that your wine is unnatural and theirs is natural, or to your point, pouring the sugar when natural sugars are occurring in wine. I mean, it is just blasphemy. So I sort of welcome it for bringing more attention in. And I think this is true of natural wine as a category. I'm very pro the effect that it has on conversation and luring people in. I do worry about misinformation, 100%. I worry about not having a dialogue with someone to explain, like, that's bullshit, right? Or, hey, where did you hear that? Is that from an influencer on Instagram or TikTok? Is that because someone, served you an ad on Facebook or Google, and you assume that because it was an ad served by someone who is incentivized for the other, that was the utter truth. It's a wake up call for the industry that there is no solution truly to the diversity in wine, diversity in the types, in the regions in which they come from, in the consumer who drinks them. And I think we need to zero in maybe more on who are these cohorts and what is driving them to consume these products. That's sort of the localization of wine. If it's everything for everyone, I think you end up in a wine.com sort of just like problem, which is you took the retail shelf and put it on the internet, and it's still just a mess. I don't think it serves a greater purpose in that people are buying more, but it's still just a wall of retail, and it's hard to navigate, and it's hard to understand what's in it, where it comes from. I go crazy when product pages have no information about the maker, about the grapes. Like, I mean, really, I obsess over these details. I'm like, give me all the information to make an informed decision. And that's the glory of the local retail shop, right? The local retail, the spirit of it. You walk in, I imagine, and Brady, I'm assuming, because this is outside of Baltimore, and I don't know where Billy's shopping, but I have an idea we shop in the same. They know you. They're like, what are you into? What style do you like to drink? They don't say, do you prefer no sugar? That's a question that a Sam asks that someone at a shop, they never would bring that up. But what they would say is, what do you typically like to drink? How much do you like to spend? Have you ever had wines from here? Oh, you're into that. You might like wines from the Jura. I think that's a fun way to say, over here is this place that makes wines just like this, but for half the price. And those are the conversations that we should be having, is driving value. And it's that exchange of value is like the trust. If we can do that as a platform, which is sort of the spirit, then we've already won, right? Because that's a consumer error, is seeing something and assuming or associating it and not really knowing what you're drinking.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, number one, I found that like education, like whether it be, like, I think that's where the natural wine scene, because those wines and the broader, but like I've introduced a bunch of folks to wines that are easy to drink and approachable at a young age. Maybe they can't, spend years in a bottle and develop, but they've been approachable. And I got to tell the person like about the winemaker. I feel like it's opened people to new varieties, but something like the sugar is like the antithesis of teaching, because they don't want you to know that all wines, or not all, but many wines are fermented to dryness. Technically, there's, very little minimal grams in every bottle. So they're making you think that when you taste fruitiness, it's always sugar. That drives me nuts. They also don't include that champagne. Like when they drink a brut champagne, it literally has dosage added, which is technically sugar added, but nobody brings that up. Anyway, I could go on forever about the sugar piece.
Let's use like food. Food is a good analogy, a quick one, right? I make food at home that is never as good as in the restaurant. They must use a lot more butter. And so it's, without a question, my chicken parm is not nearly as good as it is in a restaurant, because I would bake it. I would do whatever's the healthy version. I'd be like, oh, let's do this. No, they got this down to, they're just dumping butter, and they got better cheese. They have better ingredients and more of it. But I'm not using that against them. I'm sort of being, I don't know, not educated, but it's sort of fairly obvious to me that there's a difference in the ingredients. There's a difference in the chef or the maker, and there's probably a difference in the way it's prepared. Mm-hmm. And so you can make, I don't want to say you can make you can infer why certain things make you feel, I don't know, a way, or why you react to a level of sweetness, or why that pairs so well with food, because it cuts through that. But the average consumer doesn't think that way. And the average consumer has been told that they get headaches from things, and they'll walk in and just be like, tannins give me headaches, or whatever, or sulfites. And then and then someone hears that, some capitalist hears that and says, let's make a wand that gets rid of sulfites in wine. You're like, no, this is not what we need. What are we talking about? You can't, don't eliminate it. Don't sell me clean wine.
I'm looking at the little dropper thing, because there's a market down my house that sells wine and sells the, what's it called? Drop It wine drops, natural wine, sulfite remover and tannin remover. It's got 46 reviews on Google, 4.3 stars. People love it. It's working.
I mean, if we've all been hungover, like in Vegas, and I remember back in the day, Pedialyte was not being marketed as a hangover drink, but those in the know were drinking Pedialyte. It was just a souped up Gatorade that was going to help you. So I think we all have our, people doing IV drips now to try and recover from dehydration. Maybe it's just that you're dehydrated and didn't drink enough water. Maybe it's that there were chemically enhanced wines. But I also think that is a slippery slope when we talk about, there are marketplaces, or there are wine subscription companies that are pitching this vision of chemical-free wines. Again, I don't know. It's ambiguous if you don't define the chemical, what it is. What are the ingredients? Does the consumer actually know what that means? Chemical-free wines. Do we know what that means? Because does the consumer know the difference between an organic carrot and a regular carrot? I don't know. We can infer. It's been around a lot longer. We know one's more expensive. We assume one was made or brought up a certain way to be organic, but I think it's hard to qualify or even quantify it at this point. Why is one $2 more?
Yeah. I think to your other point though, I think it just goes back to the storytelling. And that's what I kind of meant by education. If you tell me like either whether it be the juror or like some producer in the Mosel, like his story about the steep vineyards and why the weather does this. And it turns out they left a little bit of sugar in there for balance and you don't even notice that it has sugar in it because it's like balance. If you teach people what a good wine or why they like a wine, describe the wine to them and how it got to be that way. I think I've had a lot of friends get really into wine after that. They take one or two fun facts and then they run with it and then they tell somebody else and then it kind of blossoms. I think that's the more you can tell people, but in an engaging manner, like VINOHEAD, I think that's the way to get people into it rather than telling people one or two things to avoid, you know?
I think a credo early on when we were like, all right, you have to establish your brand voice. What is our voice? And it doesn't have to be me personally. VINOHEAD is an extension of, I think, an ideology around modern wine and modern wine drinkers. I do. I hope that everyone who interprets it that way feels that way. I also hope that people who don't get it and it's okay. Like you have to accept that this isn't for everyone. And that's the wine industry's biggest problem is it has to be for everyone in order to be a multi-billion-dollar business. I think that's so wrong. I think you see that with fine wine investments. That's not for everyone. That's for a high net worth individual, or it's for someone who values the asset class as, your pitch would be that it's outperformed the S&P for the last, 25 years. Like you have your pitch materials. Ours was simple. It was like, don't tell me what it tastes like. Tell me why I should drink it. Tasting notes are great. Tasting notes are a good frame of reference. I'll use them. You can use them because then maybe it recalls something. Maybe it is the way you deliver it. Hey, this reminds me of a sour gummy worm, right? But a very specific one, like a Haribo, like you get like really granular. Like they say specificity is the key to comedy. It could be a key to unlocking someone's aha moment in wine. Hey, you remember that like lavender spray that was at Bed Bath & Beyond or Bath and Body Works? And you're like, oh my God, it's a dead ringer, right? It's just recall and nostalgia, and you're bringing in grandma's house. And you're like, yeah, I remember the pasta sauce. It does. All Italian wine has that dried oregano note and the tomato leaf and everything. So tasting notes are great as you round out the review. Like we wrote a structure for how we write wine reviews. I think if I walked into any of the pubs, the old dusty pubs, they would be like, this isn't how you write a wine review. And I would be like, but why not? I mean, I studied journalism in college. And creative writing. And I think the first rule was there are no rules. There's a little bit of that. Who says that the wine critic has to write in this terrible structure? They're all the same. Galoni and Dunnick and you name it. Like they're great. And I mean, if you find a critic that you agree with, that your palate aligns with, fine. Tell me why I should drink it. The best reviews from those guys and women too. The best reviews from them. Jancis is a legend. Got a shout out for Jancis. And I feel like Jancis has that British wit too. So maybe she's got a little bit of that. She's like, you got to tell me that it is superior at a quality price ratio from a producer that should be on my watch list. I discovered them early. I'm in the know. I got all the check boxes. That is what is important. I think that's the storytelling that they rely on the media to tell. The small producer in that tiny region is literally hopeful that broadcast hits the masses so they could sell more wine. But it's so democratized, it doesn't happen like that, right? The cover of Wine Spectator's Top 100, it used to sell out instantly. And I think it still has traction to that age group, but it doesn't resonate with us. We don't see it. It never touches us. A lot of those wines feel out of reach. They're overpriced. We can assume, and we already know, there's a lot of pay to play, Who are the biggest advertisers? What kind of scores do they get? So we wanted to eliminate all that. We stripped it out. We do not take or accept anything. We have no advertising. We are privately backed. I wanted to make sure that this thing was clean. And if we do an ad, a partnership, and we have sponsors and they want to own sort of the real estate around it, I'd rather they were non-endemic. Because once the wine industry comes in, the only ones that can afford to spend big money with us are the ones that want to control the noise, the volume, the scale. Some small winery in Santa Barbara can't afford to do a sponsorship with us. And I think that's, if I look at sort of what was out there that predated us as a sort of publication or as a platform in the aughts till now, there was only a few. Most of them were blogs. There are a few websites. I don't want to name them just to call them out, but what I saw from them was a little bit more of the old, not a lot of the new. If I looked at them as like Vice, like what Vice did to news, I would have been like, oh shit, disruptor, right? Like they were coming in for the jugular. And whether we agree with their philosophy, it was like, oh, that's a different way of presenting information than how CNN was doing it. It was gritty. It was journalistic. It had all these sort of intonations of, I see those people. It's guerrilla warfare out there. And all the wine stuff was like, you're saying that you're making it more approachable for the young consumer and you're democratizing. And I'm like, but you kind of just sound like them. And all your sponsored content is from the big boy, like you even lost sight of being a wine publication because as soon as someone from the spirit side was paying you, you were coming up with listicles for the best spirits to drink at Christmas. And I'm like, all right, well, sorry guys. But that to me, that it taints everything in media when the people who pay your bills are also being boosted.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's refreshing. I think the way that you're describing how VINOHEAD approaches it, can you tell our audience when someone starts tracking with VINOHEAD and kind of getting immersed in what you guys do with specificity, kind of what are they going to find? What are they going to see from you guys on a weekly, monthly, daily basis across your channels? What is VINOHEAD for the consumer?
Yeah. So we, 3 pillars of the business, I would say, content, number one, first and foremost, which we've really had to sort of slow our roll in terms of the amount of development in video and podcasts, mostly because I think sometimes I don't want to get caught in the same realm as everyone else. So I'm always looking for dynamic personalities. I'm always looking for a different format. I think what happens, and I'm glad to see you guys doing this because I do think it's a value add for your customers, but also don't stop. My rule on a lot of these things is you have to be able to do 100. That was an old rule in any original content that you would produce. And I think if you talk to a lot of people from, again, whether it was like a sports media brand, like a Barstool or a Bleacher Report, I mean, I was sort of in this world peripherally for so many years. It sucks to pilot something, get it up and then yank it down because you're like, how are we going to pay to do this? And there's a cost associated with it. There's a cost in making it and producing it and distributing it and all that. So I always struggle when I'm saying, can we do 100 of these? Or is it just going to be creator-based content where you have someone on TikTok telling you what to drink, why to drink it? We have these thoughts all day. So newsletter for us was always top of funnel. And because it was the pandemic and we couldn't see each other, we started with a newsletter. And the goal of that newsletter was just review wine. And we were drinking thousands and thousands of bottles and telling you what we were drinking in real time. And we're always curating it in a list form that, again, I didn't feel like it wasn't a paid for list. We weren't trying to end up in your Google search results. This was not clickbait. These were pure listicles based around tent poles, based around themes, based around grape varietals, regions, you name it. And I do think that those guides are valuable. We all look for best barbecue restaurant, best burger in the city, best pizza. Like we know these publications on the food side, Eater, Thrillist, The Infatuation. Why wasn't there anyone doing that in wine? And could you do it without web pages, but do it in a device that was actually more like a lot of the great newsletter businesses that get delivered in your inbox every morning? So start with the wine reviews. Video and podcast, I'll always say are coming. And I think it's something, again, where we would do it in a big way. We wouldn't just sort of roll out one. We're looking at more as a network play from the, some content perspective. The second pillar is live experiences. And couldn't do that for a little while, but I'm happy that we're back. And it's everything from meetups at local wine bars to private dinners to trips. We've done a lot actually in that space, but it's all sort of, you got to be on the list. You get a DM. Occasionally we sell tickets. Other times it's as simple as like you show up and you have to scan a QR code to get in or show your credentials to get in. And then we have a flight prepared and stuff. We've done New York, we've done Chicago, we've done LA, we've done fun stuff. Netflix, we've done a tasting with Netflix. We've done some stuff at the private members clubs like Soho House and Noya House and others like that. So that's more just community driven, I would say, like getting people together so that we can all meet up and drink. And it started with me putting a case of wine out on my rooftop and just having people over. And Billy, were you ever at one of those? I feel like you've gotten the invite for sure, but
I've been invited, but it's almost inevitably when I'm traveling. But soon I will make one.
Anytime. So we tried to do those at least, once every couple months where it was just like, come on over, drink and hang out with your peers. And peers doesn't necessarily mean industry. It could just mean you're in wine. You love wine, you're into it. So that was sort of the second. And the third pillar, which is our newest, which was always part of the plan, was, once you start to build a sizable list and an email list with people who come back to your newsletter and are getting sort of content and information, how do you unlock other valuable tenets? And I think one of those, which I alluded to earlier, is the small producer is disadvantaged in getting their wine out into the market. The best, benefit they have is you stumble into their tasting room if they have one. And then it's more whimsical anyway, because you're like, I met the guy, right? I met the winemaker and I drank the wine and we bought a case and we brought it back to Los Angeles or whatever. Well, what does it look like if you don't get there? What does it look like in a pandemic era? What does it look like when it's too expensive to go to these places, but you still want to try the wine? They don't drive a lot of sales of their wine through their website. Most winery websites are not very good. I think we would all agree. Shopify is the nicest thing that's happened to them, and even some of them are slow to convert. And a lot of the wine technology out there, I don't think is very profound. And that's all B2B software, right? That's not great. And some of those companies are trying to perfect a consumer facing, but they always feel very templated and ugly. And if you don't know the wine and you get there and you add it to your shopping cart, it's very easy to be like, nah, I don't want to sign up, create a login, username, all this. So we said, what if we started by creating exclusive drops where we partner with wineries, give them access to our mailing list, and literally do a D2C model where only people on our list can have access to these wines in these sort of 72-hour sales events. This is not original. I recognize that. I mean, maybe original for how people are sort of pursuing those types of things in wine, but I didn't want to do daily offers. I don't love the daily offers. And I get it. It's more of a value play. If you're winetext.com, if you're Last Bottle, I think Som Select does a really good job with their daily offers. So I do think some of them are high quality, but how many consumers our age are really turned on to those? I can mention these things. A lot of people don't know. Maybe they've overheard their crazy aunt has wine still sold out and is getting, but most of the time I feel like people are still buying just like cheap Napa Cab. They're not buying Barolo. So I even felt like the wine selection from a lot of those daily offers or flash sale sites was diminishing returns in terms of that's like the Marshalls, right? The TJ Maxx model of like, it's discount Nordstrom Rack if we're going high end. Why wouldn't we just uphold value and work with wineries that are really hard to access outside on sort of national distribution? They're local, maybe spots and dots at retail shops and restaurants, but these are not wines that you would see in Baltimore. You're not going to see them in the Midwest. Like they are very small, 5,000 cases or less. We had to solve a lot of compliance. We had to solve some technology hurdles. We had to build this sort of infrastructure to accept payments. I don't even want to, honestly, like I spent more time figuring out how to do it than to actually launch a campaign, market it, and get the thing sold. At the end of the day, we remain a third-party provider in our platform, which means you are buying that wine directly from the winery. And we've created sort of a marketing site in order to facilitate that. And I think it's unique in its own right. And again, it's really just exclusively for our mailing list. So the goal was always use this newsletter with information and content. And then the third layer was open up access. Get the wines that you're always talking about, that you're reviewing, the stuff from the Central Coast, the stuff from the Finger Lakes that no other publication gives the time of day to. Right now it's solely US focused, but we're obviously have our eyes on imported wines and stuff like that. But we want to make sure that when you buy it, your money is going to the winery to support them. We take a platform fee. We're not, of course, but we've eliminated middlemen. You do not go through the 3-tier system. You do not buy this from sort of winery to wholesale distributor to retailer to you. We've cut out that step, and that's no different than Postmates or DoorDash or Instacart or Drizzly, really, right? But in this case, you're actually going to support the winery direct versus a local liquor shop.
Yeah, I think people are, pretty sensitive to that too these days. They'd much rather give their money to the actual producer, especially if they know that it's still family owned or locally owned or something like that, than to, 6 other people down the line. I actually think that might be one of the sort of consumer sentiments that resonates across all of the different generational demographics. So yeah, that's super important.
I mean, you brought it up earlier about craft beer. I don't know why we don't talk about this more, but you look at craft beer, you look at craft spirits, you look at craft coffee. Craft wine is in the first inning. It's been around for a while, but I think we're in the first inning. There's a long play here. why we aren't exposing the consumer to more of that access from the sort of even 10,000 cases or less. So in order for us to even consider you, we hand select all the wineries we partner with. I'm happy to say that actually one of the wineries, the second drop that we ever did, which was actually a beta test, it wasn't a live product, was with Massican and Dan Petroski, who last week just sold his winery to Gallo, which is mind-blowing to me that anyone at Gallo was hip enough. No, I'm kidding. Was
100%.
I mean, that's a big, I think for us as a platform that focuses on small independent wineries and craft wine in general, like I believe in the terminology of if we have to create that, fine, but craft wine is a category. Forget natural, forget unnatural, whatever we want to call it. Massican, this guy's been making great wine since 2009 and so unique. And the story's unique. And the only guy making only white wines in Napa and then seeking out mostly Italian varietals that otherwise no one would even buy up there. I mean, he's like the only buyer. I think he had 90% of all of it.
Yeah.
So he's making less than 10,000 cases, but they saw something. And I think what they saw is a culture shift. The same thing, the same signals that we see. I was impressed that they jumped in so early. I don't think it's the end. I think there's more of that to come. And to me, that's just a boon for our business to say, we see those companies. We're in communication with them. We are picking them and we're going to start doing these. So our drops now we're trying to move them up to every couple of weeks. We're going to try to get them weekly. Right now, about once a month, we are doing these exclusive drops directly if you're on our mailing list. The next one's in a couple of weeks, but all of it is coming from what we think are sort of modern day wines from awesome producers that need to be on your radar.
Yeah, that was
awesome.
the first thing that Billy and I said in the Slack. We said, we're happy for Dan. It was like, that's great for Dan, but that's really great for Gallo.
Yeah.
When they acquired.
I mean, if I was to put a hit list together, like we could do this. This would be like our fantasy draft, right? Like we could put our hit list of who else should be on that, target list for Constellation or LVMH or Gallo, right? I think it's interesting when you don't make 50,000 cases or 100 or 200,000 cases for someone like that to be like, they're picking up steam. They're doing something that's a little esoteric. And even the quote in the article about the sale sort of points to that. These are not your traditional white wines that are coming from Napa. These are high acid, high octane, intentionally food friendly. But, I pour that for my mother. I don't think she quite understands. In fact, when I was home, I saw a couple of the bottles that she purchased just sitting there gathering dust. I don't think she's opened them because they're not, but they also acquired Rombauer a week earlier. So I guess,
I was about to say that it's like they're slowly coming around, but they get Rombauer first to make sure they still have their traditional bases covered.
So the Rombauer is the put and the Massican's the call.
The call.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all super excited. And I mean, anytime somebody turns me on, again, I feel like we're hunters and gatherers. At the end of the day, what does our team and our staff get to do, right? And I think we're blessed with really great writers, wine educators, sommeliers, but people who aren't total assholes. They don't take themselves too seriously. They're young, they're cool, they're in it. We're thinking about the same things, but we love sharing that information. Yo, have you had this? Have you been to this crazy farm in Mount Hood, Oregon to try this guy's wines? Like they're wild and ambient and this, and you just start geeking. And those are the notes that we start to look for once you understand what that style represents, what that region stands for when someone's trying to emulate it. I think that's cool. When someone tells you there's a California producer making wines like from the Mosel, you're like, I know what that means. So I want to go drink those, or I need to get my hands on it and see if there's an actual comparison versus, anyone that tells you, hey, they're making Sangio that tastes like Brunello. You're like, really though? Is it really that good? Can it be? But that's okay. That's the challenge. And your job is sort of to be an amplifier. I think that's the platform's job is always, we found this little thing that nobody knows about, and we want to amplify it out to people so that they discover it.
Do you think the internet as a whole has done a better job? Because I feel like there's a bunch of these small producers in the old world too that we're getting access to, and their stories are being told that weren't able to before. We only got to hear the big guys. I think the stories are just starting to make it to people, and now we're seeing the impact of that.
Yeah, I think it's just so crowded. I mean, I think Kermit Lynch was doing this for so long and was sort of like one of the original, almost, a journal on the trail of everything that they were finding, discovering, and putting it out. But does the consumer know to turn the bottle over and see Kermit Lynch wine merchants on there? I mean, no. In fact, I think that's a good hack a lot of times is look at the distributor and start to understand how they build their portfolio. And that's sort of a stamp of approval as much as the restaurant where you tried it. I also think, the internet has enabled us to do our own research, but if you don't have a starting point, do you know where to go? And I think that's just why is it that a lot of people sort of believe that Caymus or Silver Oak is a nexus, or even Veuve, right? Like, why is it that Champagne stops and starts at Veuve and they haven't had Krug, right? Or like other things. And obviously there's a price differential, but do they even know that that's out there? Or do they even know why they like the thing? Or is it just because that's the most expensive bottle they ever bought? And it was a really nice bottle and it was at a decent restaurant. And so they associated that with living the high life. And Brady brought up earlier, like attainable luxury has a lot of merit in wine. And if you can keep it that way, or even create scarcity, which is what the cult brands did really well, then all of a sudden it's kind of like the analogy I always use is like what BMW does, right? Or LVMH is a great example of attainable luxury, but they make things that get you in at an entry level, and then they want to work you up the system so that by the time you're done with them and you're in retirement age and you get your fun classic car, you also have a 7 Series, now you're spending $150,000 on a souped up 7 Series, but you started with the 3 Series or maybe less, but they got you hooked and you grew with it. The wine industry, I think, we're just trying to get people hooked and understanding it. And then I do think they will, like all of us, you start to spend more money. $30 is your ceiling, then 35 becomes your ceiling, then 40. And you start to understand what you like. And then you go, oh yeah, that was silly that I paid that much money for that wine. What was the difference between the $300 cab in Napa and the $75 cab in Napa? I like the 75 one better. Well, if that's the one you like better, then you don't need to flex. It doesn't matter. It's what you like. And maybe the reason why it doesn't cost as much is because it hasn't been branded. It's not Gucci. So it's some other brand that's, not 30, 40 years old that is trying to break in, and they're still buying the same grapes. If it was Beckstoffer, it would cost $300, but you know what I mean? Anyone else, it's like, it's still the same grapes, and they're going to paint the picture that it's Oakville adjacent or whatever they do. But I love hearing about or finding the one that's 75 because we know better. And I think that's okay. If you have the friend that knows better and can guide you in any category, you like that person, the person who saves you money on hotels, airfare, clothing. This t-shirt, a lot cheaper than some other white t-shirts I could have bought.
Billy, do you have anything else?
No, I think we've covered so much. You have me just thinking about, I think to your point, actually, it's my birthday's on Sunday this week. This will come after, we'll release this after that. So either way, like when you're thinking about the really expensive wines, I'm like literally going to go to a dinner and I'm thinking about getting like an Emidio Pepe because I think I've never had one and they're amazing. But compared to, I could be spending way more on like a flashy Burgundy or like a Bordeaux bottle that everybody knows. But instead I'm getting thinking about a small producer from Abruzzo that makes, apparently some of the best wines in Italy. So I think you're just really reiterating the more that people know, the actual better they will drink and the less they will spend in the long run. So I think VINOHEAD's doing a service to us in that way, for sure.
Oh, well, we appreciate it. And listen, anytime you break something here, when you disrupt something, you cause a little bit of chaos. So have we hit that threshold? No. But do some people probably not or agree with our way of going about it? Sure. And I have to accept that. And I'm good. I'm good with it. When you take the small producer and bring them to the masses, and this is true in anything, right? We talked about indie artists. Eventually they get to that point where you grow sour on them, which is an unfortunate reality. Is like when things get big, you're like, I liked them when they were young and cool, right? I liked them when they were playing clubs. I liked the Beatles when they were in Hamburg, I didn't like them once they were making Let It Be. Okay. So you like them in 61 or 63, whatever it was. You didn't like them in 1970. I mean, it's sort of we can't help ourselves. I think that's true of athletes and liking them when they're on their rise, but then when they get the big contract, just being on their ass, right? Every Yankees fan can relate to that. Once they get paid, they're not incentivized anymore, or they had a great year on a contract here. I mean, this is, again, happenstance, right? In most cases, do they let up? Are they dealing with stuff. So I think on the wine side of it, we want to break brands. I want you to find out about the newest, the coolest, the former winemaker over there, an assistant winemaker who's got the side project. Like, I want you to know that they're getting the same grapes. I want you to know that they harvest it, that they do everything the right way. And then you have to make your own decision. If you want to leave VINOHEAD to join their wine club, sign up for their stuff. Like, I feel like we're a discovery platform. That's what we're here to do. In fact, I always tell the wineries when we're doing these e-commerce partnerships, I'm like, listen, we're giving them, this is your Super Bowl ad at some point, right? I'm giving you the keys. We're going to retain some of the data, the customer data, but ultimately you're shipping the wine. So you know who this customer is too. We're going to tell your story the best way we know how. We're going to do photography. We're going to create video content. We're going to create this sort of marketing experience, almost like a launch site. This is your billboard. I want them to know that we are responsible for putting you in that position. And then after that, I want them to be your fan. Go, be with God, whatever that is. And I think they understand that. I'm being honest and truthful when I say it. There's a mutual exchange. There's a return. But our goal is to be the discovery machine. Their job is to make great wine. And I think that's how you separate between what I brought up earlier about B2B and B2C. We're a consumer platform. They have to trust that we're guiding them and bringing them the goods. And the producer has to trust that we're doing it with integrity and honesty, and that we care about the small independent, winemakers or the small independent producers. So as long as we can toe that line, that's the business. And I think we've done a fairly good job so far. We have a lot of stuff to do. We got a long way to go, as everyone does. And if it's the first inning, I'm usually good for about 7 strong innings of one-hit baseball. I could still go out there, but I really need a good setup guy and a good closer. So if you know anyone, let me know.
Nice, man. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing, and best of luck as VINOHEAD grows. If you have something in DC or Baltimore and you need some plugs, let me know. You're probably more connected than I am though. So
no, I might need you to hand deliver some wine to Maryland because one of our producers does not have a shipping permit there. So I was, as it is with other states, I was like, Maryland, not Utah, not Rhode Island, but I saw Maryland on one of the lists. So hopefully we'll open up more and more states, but I appreciate you guys. I feel like I owe you a hat, which we're just testing out some of this cool merch, which I know we talked about early on, Brady, but these are awesome. This is a one of one.
I want a long sleeve pocket tee.
Long sleeve. I got you on that.
I appreciate you.
I'm all for it. And all the things we're doing are just like bespoke. So let me see what I can work on.
We're gonna try and connect with Christy when we go to Oregon in December. She was one of our favorite interviews that we did as the pod was coming up.
I get more and more people that tell me how much they adore. And Christy is our managing editor who's been with us for a while and has created her own sort of influencer brand, that started prior to her joining VINOHEAD. Great writer, wine educator, and sees it firsthand too. So I always feel like the people who work with us are also part of this sort of tribe that recognizes why we think young people drink plenty of wine and just need maybe a little bit of a boost versus, Rob McMillan. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's Billy's guy. Careful.
Billy, when Rob's in town, we can go to dinner and I can show him a busy place in LA with young people and wine glasses on every table, because there's not whiskey and martinis on every table, but there's a glass of wine on every table. And I think that's a unique point to bring up whenever you're sitting with someone who questions whether or not young people are into it.
All right. I just need to meet him first, and then we can go to dinner. That'll work out well.
Tell him we're gunning for him. And I know you guys are too, because someone needs to help these small wineries, and Silicon Valley Bank's not. So
cool, man. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate the time.
That's the end of our episode. That was our double interview episode with Dan Petroski and Josh Entman. I hope everybody goes and congratulates Dan on the Massican Instagram page and buys some of his wine. And now everybody also should go and sign up for VINOHEAD with Josh Entman and the whole crew with Christy and everybody, and enjoy that great content. We will be back with another episode next week. Until then, cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.